Hey guys, it's Jane. It's Friday and I'm back for Friday Reads. Well, the BookTube SFF shortlists have been announced. I am very happy to see that my two noms for Best Novel, The Obelisk and Ninefox Gambit, both got onto the shortlist. Beyond that, I haven't really read any graphics this year, so I didn't nominate in that category. My short story nom didn't get up, and the YA stuff looks pretty inexplicable, and there's, Brandon Sanderson everywhere. So what does it say? It says that my reading isn't quite the same as everybody on BookTubes, but that is fine because we are all allowed to do our own thing, right? We're all allowed to do our own thing, and the category that I cared most about, I'm happy with the shortlist, so, it's all good. It's all good. I finished Capricornia. Yay me. So I realised looking back at what I actually filmed last week is that I talk for any number of minutes, but I don't really tell you what the book is about. So I'm going to try and give you just a quick overview of that book. It is set in the early part of the 20th century in northern Australia. All of the names of the places are kind of disguised, but I'm pretty sure it's actually meant to be Darwin. And it's a time when settlement up there, white settlement, was still relatively new. Even to this day, northern Australia has a lot less white folks living up there, and as a result, the Aboriginal communities are much more present and visible. There are lots of Aboriginal Australians living down the east coast and in the cities and whatever, but because there's so many other people around, it's less visible. So the relationship between the settlers and the Aboriginal communities is at the heart of the story. But there's also Chinese folk there in the townships. There were Chinese people in Australia, very early on. There's also people from the islands and, Indonesia, although it's not called Indonesia, gets a mention. There are German settlers who become at issue during the war years. So there's a whole bunch of different racial interactions, but probably the focus is actually on the half-caste population, is what it's called in the book. The half-castes, or possibly yellowfellas, is another sort of terminology that the book uses, who are products of union largely of white men and Aboriginal women. That way because there weren't very many white women up north in Australia, and so that's what happened. These biracial folk are, of course, in a very specific social position, and probably the central character of the book is a guy called Norman, who has a very strained start of life. But and the first sort of third of the book kind of is sort of giving us backstory about the generation before him and how he comes to be born. He's taken away from Capricornia and lives down in the south in a city most of his young life, gets a trade, is treated pretty normally by society. The story is that his mother was Javanese, so there's lies being told to not just other people but also to him about his heritage. And then as a young man he heads back up to Capricornia, and immediately he arrives, people peg him as half-caste, and this means a whole bunch of stuff about what is expected of him, what is not expected of him, and ways that his life is limited as a result, like he can't buy a drink in the pub and all of these sorts of things. And this is just an incredible shock to him, and yeah, he was a railway fitter, and had come up thinking that there was going to be work. But all of a sudden he can't get work because they don't want to employ a yellow fella. And yeah, there's all this stuff about social interactions. And it sounds kind of bleak. It is and it isn't as a book. There is a huge amount of humour in the book. There's lots of sort of almost tall tales of ridiculous things that are going on in these sort of townships. The stories about things like this are told with a huge amount of sympathy and humour while still being quite black. There is especially a huge amount of sympathy in the stories for the Aboriginal characters, and particularly for the half-caste folk who are being described. They're probably the people who the book has the most time for, although everybody actually is treated quite sympathetically. Even characters who in some parts seem to be quite priggish and unfortunate, other things will happen and you see another side to them, and the sympathy of the story kind of goes with them. So it's this long, rambly tale with lots of kind of action and adventure, people running away from the police, all sorts of weird schemes and things going on, while at its heart being quite a telling critique of race. It's very readable, and it's actually quite enjoyable. So Capricornia by Xavier Herbert is an Australian classic that I would recommend if you have a bit of time on your hands to have a look at. The other book that I finished this week is Max Gladstone's Last First Snow, which is the fourth of the Craft sequence. This is a fantasy series that I have nothing but praise for. It's really unique and thrashes out a whole bunch of ideas around power. I think that's the overriding thematic concern throughout the series that I've read so far. We have different characters who wield power in different ways, and we look at how that affects them personally, how that interacts with other people, and yeah, it's a really interesting discussion of power. The Max Gladstone books are all on sale as ebooks at the moment, so if you haven't read one, I would suggest you go and pick one up because they're really good reads, and they're cheap as at the moment. Having finished the Max Gladstone, I have just started reading S.K. Dunstall's Linesman. This is a book I'd never heard about before a couple of days ago. The Aurelius Awards shortlists were announced this week. The Aurelius Awards are an Australian genre fiction awards, and it's not something that I'm super invested in, but I heard that they were out and I went and had a look at the shortlist, and S.K. Dunstall's Confluence is one of the books nominated for Best Science Fiction in this year's awards. And I just did a little bit of reading, and I discovered that S.K. Dunstall is actually two sisters writing together, and that just kind of caught my imagination. Confluence is the third book in a series, and so I thought, well, I want to start at the first book, and I looked. My library didn't have it, but I requested it, and like half an hour after I requested it, they got back to me saying that they, had purchased it, which is the most super exciting quick turnaround that I'd ever come across. So I was like, sure, I'll read Linesman. I started it this morning, and it is the first 50 pages or whatever, which is what I've read, is a really, really good read. So I'm looking forward to getting more into that and telling you about that maybe next week. That's what I'm up to, and I would love to hear what you guys are reading. I hope you're well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!